Shh, don't say a word. Don't say a word. After 6 weeks of being in another country, his moods changed. He became obsessive, jealous, moody and controlling. There were 2 major incidents in Australia where we lived, one of which I thought he was actually going to kill me, and it was very physical. I went to the doctor who was going to send me to, or wanted to send me to a refuge in Brisbane. We lived in Sydney. I didn't go, but after another incident of him headbutting me and other things, I did leave. I didn't let anybody know in the UK what I was going through. I didn't have any money. He would bring $5 around each day to keep that control and buy my groceries each week. There were lots of threats. Because of the fear that was instilled in me after the incident where he nearly killed me, I took his threats seriously. One of which was that he would wait for me outside work, stab me in the head and jump up and down on my skull until it split.
Through my experiences, I can say that 30 odd years ago, maybe more, if you went to the police or you went to any organisations to ask for help, even maybe the health services, there was always that reluctance. But as time moves on, things change, people change, laws change, service provision changes. So all that has done, the needs are more, but maybe the people in the community might be more aware as they grow up, their children grow up, and access to services may be easier, but then the understanding is still not there. So in my opinion, we have gone round and come back to the stage that we were, or that I was 30 odd years ago, helping these people. We're back to square one, and we are doing the same things that we did before.
My mother-in-law, she's telling me my son is coming, he kill you, you get lost my home, go away, get lost my home, my son is coming, he kill you. I am gone, is coming brother's home. He says, where is she? Where is she? I kill her. Where is she? I gone upstairs his room, shut the room, shut the door, and I'm very very scared. He's killed me.
I've done a lot of cultural awareness so that people are aware of different cultures, different barriers that, so that they can then understand where communities came from or what their backgrounds are.
I come to England. My husband, families, everybody changed. First day, my husband tell me, you know my wife, only my mom, my brother look after.
Raising awareness is the important thing. People will say that we've done that already, but don't forget, things move on and you need to keep doing that, and that is important. So maybe conferences, maybe raise more awareness, maybe do more training with frontline staff, all very relevant.
And when I told him, he freaked out. He said it's impossible for us to have a kid at the minute. We won't be able to afford it. And the same day that I told him, he was already researching abortion clinics. Yeah, and then the following morning when I woke up, he already had all the papers ready for me to go and see the consultant. And he made the appointment. He made the appointment ASAP. He even called my boss to ask him if I can have the day off. And it was just one day as well, which was bizarre. And he took me to a clinic. He didn't want to wait. He left. So I was sat there because we wait in this waiting room, which is very cold and impersonal. And I was left there for 2 hours waiting for her. And then it is a little bit like a factory, so nobody really pays attention. I was really upset. I was crying before they gave me anesthetics, but nobody really asked why. I didn't really cope with anesthetics well, so I had to stay there for hours and hours. And at the end they said, listen, we're closing the clinic, so you either have to go to A&E or go back home. And I remember, because I couldn't do my zip in my trousers, I remember walking, trying to hold my jeans and feeling really sick and really pale. And we got to a taxi, because I said I don't want to go to A&E, I have enough hospitals. We got to a taxi and he asked me if I had money for the taxi.
Domestic violence can happen to any woman, regardless of her age, her ethnic background, her cultural beliefs, disability, economic status, sexuality. Domestic violence doesn't discriminate against any woman, and 1 in 4 women would experience domestic abuse in their lifetime. The big misconception that people have about domestic violence is black eyes and bruises, but there's a lot more to domestic violence than the physical.
domestic violence had been there from before I was born. So I'm the youngest of 3. And there's a lot that I don't remember because it was so traumatic. So there are sort of very vague sort of recollections of just being frightened of Dad. That's what I remember the most. And Mum wasn't always around because she was also in psychiatric hospitals because she had a breakdown many years ago because of his violence towards her. So I witnessed my brother, one of my brothers, being put into a certain position before being hit, and a very sort of vulnerable position. They call it sort of almost, it's almost like a torture position. It's used by the Vietnamese or the Chinese. It's where you sit almost like a chicken and you have to squat down and you have to put your hands between your legs and hold your ears. So you're really, really vulnerable. And then you get hit on the back, on the head.
Don't say a word. I should say goodbye before I say hello. So darling, hold me closely tonight. Because if you open your eyes, I'll never let you go. Moving slowly, we'll all sleep tonight. Shh, don't say a word.
And I had to weigh these 2 children which are in the world, or that one which is in my room. I didn't have a choice. I went to hospital with him. And the doctor examined me. She said the baby is fully a baby at this stage. And if you want, you can sign a consent form and we can save the baby and give it for adoption to someone else. And I said, well, I can't sign a consent form because he doesn't want the baby to be born. So giving it to someone else, it's even worse. The day I was supposed to go, it was supposed to be a cesarean. So the day I was supposed to go for the cesarean, I cried in the hospital and I said, I can't go to it. His sister was there and she said, don't create a drama. He was like, you're insulting my sister, we're here now, because she's feeling embarrassed because you're crying. And he said, okay, fine, if you don't want a cesarean, you can come back home. He started beating me up. And he said, it's a choice. I'm not going to say to you, go for a cesarean and get rid of the baby. Either you make the decision, you're staying here or you're leaving. And you're not going to see the children anymore. So I gave up. I said, however, whatever you want. Because obviously I was more concerned about the other 2 children. And he said, no, either if you want to look after the other 2 kids and you want to still be married to me, then you need to abort the baby. I was 6.5 months pregnant at that time. So the cesarean was done. I don't know if the child is still alive, if the doctor's given it to someone for adoption, because I still remember in the operation
theatre when I was waking up. I could hear a voice, like they were talking to each other, that it's beautiful, which made me realize maybe the child is alive somehow. And I kept asking, do you know if the child is alive or not? And they said, no, it's not.
Shh, don't say a word.
Sort of most horrific scene I remember is of my mum. So she was already a very, very sick woman, and she was home at one time from the hospital. We used to bring her home for short periods when she was okay. And he was hitting her on the head, but hitting her on the head with the heel of his shoe. And again, I don't know why he started that. All I remember is the actual scene of her being hit. There was never any discussion with my brother or with anybody else, come to that, about what was happening. It was our life. That's what was happening at home, and it's almost like we knew to keep quiet about it. You don't go and discuss it. You're going to other people's homes and so on. You don't say anything. I don't know why you don't say anything, but you don't say anything. That was our home. And also, we went to other places. He got a lot of sympathy, actually, because he was this poor man who was bringing up his two children at home then. My oldest brother wasn't there. He was older, and because of the violence and so on, he was living at home. So he was this poor man who was working really hard to bring up these two children, and he had a sick wife. So he had all the sympathy. And that's what all I would hear everywhere we went. Poor man, isn't he doing so well, and so on.
Hush, little baby, don't say a word. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird. And if that mockingbird don't sing, Mama's gonna buy you a diamond ring. And if that diamond ring turns brass, Mama's gonna buy you a looking glass.
There was never any remorse after domestic violence. There was a violent incident. He would walk away from me.
Shh, don't say a word.
He grabbed me by the neck, had me against the wall, children were in the living room, then he dragged me and pushed me into the living room. I didn't fall onto my children, but I could have done.
Don't say a word. How is it? Shh.
The level of children that are starting to try and take their own life is becoming a lot younger. The effects on children can be really severe. In some cases, they often will present in various forms. Quite often they will become very isolated, they struggle to form friendships and hold relationships. They can also become very violent because of what they've seen, and they feel that's how they need to behave. The effects of domestic violence on children can present in many ways. Some children become very isolated and struggle to form relationships. This can impact on them within school. They have no friends, they'll often be on their own in the playground. Other times they can present as being quite violent, possibly through what they've seen. This then becomes that they can be pushed out of school because they're seen as being naughty children and that they're just doing it for attention when actually they're really struggling inside. I've known of families that their children have now begun trying to self-harm with themselves by cutting or scratching.
I've been aware of several incidents whilst working in the local community and been fortunate enough for people to share them with me. My real concern is the time it takes for interventions to be successful. As a member of the local community, I'd like to see more people taking responsibility if they notice something they think is slightly suspicious, not to feel guilty about reporting it. They don't have to give their names, but also training staff to be aware, training staff in companies, training in schools I've mentioned before, so that everyone can recognise the signs of domestic violence and child abuse.
People may wonder why women stay in a situation like this and why they don't just leave. But until you know fear, you don't leave. I can't explain it, you put up with it, and it is all about fear and control, that you don't feel good enough to be able to do it on your own. Moods, coming in from work, you just know from a look that it wasn't going to be a good time. And unless you're in that situation, you don't know what that look is. But you could tell just the presence of him walking in the door, you knew if you were in for it or not. And it was, I can't explain if it was his manner, but as soon as he would come in, I would feel it and be on absolute eggshells and do everything I could to appease him, make sure the children were out the way, busy doing something else. But this is very early on when they were young. But something simple could set him off. It would always be my fault. It could be that he'd walk in and, where's my shirt for tomorrow? I was going to do that later. That's not good enough, I want it now.
I think we have to realise that the effects of domestic violence on children is actually child abuse. These children are being abused, and for years it wasn't really recognised. It was seen as a couple problem, a problem between the couple. I've heard a senior social worker saying this is to do with the synergy between the couple. Now, there has been clear research to show that these guys, if the partner leaves them and then they separate, he goes out immediately and gets another one, and he does the same thing again. So it's not synergy between the couple, it's what he's doing to her, and it affects the children. And that's something that has long not been recognised, but the problem now is when it is recognised, the woman is being blamed for it. But I mean, I saw it in the refuge children who were, I remember one case about a little boy. He was over 2 years old and couldn't walk because his father had told the mother that she wasn't allowed to take him out the cot. So for 2 years he'd sat in a cot, and we had to get people in to give him therapy to help him to walk. There are children who get caught in the crossfire, they get beaten. There are the children are scared. You can see it in them that they don't understand what's going on. They're scared. They're losing sleep because they can hear what's going on. They don't know who to blame. Sometimes the mother is protecting them by being harder on them. So I've heard this from one woman. She described how she thought her mother was a bad one because she was always telling her off. But what her mother was doing was leaping in and telling her off before he could leap in and actually batter her. So she's had to come to terms with the guilt she feels now because she blamed her mother. I mean, I don't even know where to start with children.
As a community, I really believe that we need to be looking harder for the signs of domestic abuse. I still believe that there's a lot of people that think that it is just physical, and that if there's no bruises or broken bones, then everything is fine, where in fact the worst type of abuse can often be emotional. The effects on the children is child abuse, and the effects on the mother or the father can be completely life-changing.
After getting the cesarean done and getting with my third child, with the baby girl. I came back over here. He used to come over after 6 months, 1 year. Later on, he called my children over to Pakistan. He said the grandmother is ill and she wants to see the children. So I couldn't go at that time because I was a bit stuck over here at that time, so I couldn't go straight away. I said, fine, I'll send them over. When they went there, he said they're not coming back.
From a personal point of view, I'm really delighted that domestic violence is being talked about far more, and child abuse in all sorts of arenas. We don't always see the signs of the effects of domestic violence, but they're there, and there needs to be more funding, more support for the families.
Yeah, so the thing that made me leave was I've been diagnosed with cancer, and I thought, you know what, there must be a little bit more to life than being unhappy in a relationship. I stopped recognizing myself. I honestly can't remember when was the last time I was laughing, smiling.
I think what people don't realise is that there are some terrible things happening behind closed doors that we don't even know about, we don't recognise. And sometimes people will think that there's something odd about their neighbours, but they'll often blame the woman, they'll think that she's a bit weird. But in fact, there are terrible things happening. I remember one case I had. This guy was very fussy about how she did the housework. And she would carefully hoover the carpet just before he came in, so it was all nice and clear, all nice and clean. And he would come in, he would stand on the mat, and he would look down and he would find one piece of thread. And if he found one piece of thread, he would attack her physically, and she knew this was going to happen. And you know, you can't eliminate all threads, so she knew that when he wanted to, it didn't always happen, but when he wanted to, he could just beat her up because he had an excuse. And you know, that's one example. Very respectable lady in her 60s, been married to this guy for 40 years. When she first came, she said she didn't really think she should be here, it wasn't her type of thing. She'd read the book about the Freedom Programme and not, well, it wasn't for her. But she came, and she came back again, which I was surprised about. And then when we did the sexual controller, we look at the sexual abuse, and that's the hardest one for women to look at. We always provide chocolate when we do that because, you know, you need something to relieve the pain. And she suddenly said, I just realised I've been raped all through my marriage. She said she'd be asleep and he would just climb on top of her. And she didn't dare do anything, she just lay there. She said, I thought that was his right. She was quite a religious woman, Christian. I thought that was his right. But I see now I've been raped for 40 years. And then you see the women who feel committed to the man because they feel sorry for him, because he's made them feel sorry for them, and they'll go back because they care about him, and everyone condemns her. I think this is the thing that drives me nuts. Whenever the subject of domestic violence comes up, people always say, why doesn't she leave? That is not the proper question. We're not why are we questioning her behaviour when it's him that's doing it?
Don't say a word.
Used to punch my mum, slap mum. He had her up with a knife to her throat, threatening to kill her. Normally around Christmas time was the worst time.
We used to have to go and live with my uncle, or stay with my uncle and aunties and things like that. And verbally abused, called her a slag, a whore in front of us. We'd hear the arguing and I'd come downstairs because my sister was little. We'd listen to the floorboards and then I'd come downstairs and look through the crack of the door. My mechanism was to block everything out, carry on, have children at an early age, just wanted unconditional love, show them that it doesn't have to be that way. I was just so determined not to be anything like my parents. The younger two have been sheltered quite well. The older two have seen more than they should over the last few years, but in my 30s that's when it all came out, and I started suffering from depression. Although I've been in physical and abusive relationships, I've also been in with mental cruelty, and I feel that it's the mental cruelty, the things my dad used to say to my mum, the things that people have said to me, you're a dirty, disease-ridden whore, nobody will want you, you've got how many kids, who's going to take that on? I never wanted anybody to take anything on, I was quite willing to pay for myself, always have done. But when you're ground down so far, you believe it, you believe nobody will want you, so you stay with them. And then you find the next person you go to is exactly the same sort of person, because what you've admitted, what the signs that you've given off have shown that you're a weak person and that you're easily manipulated. But when they get in your head, there is no getting out. You just can't. And people say, well, why don't you just walk away? Because you can't. Because yes, you can walk away from somebody that's punched you and the scars will heal. But when they're inside your head constantly, you can't. And until something, there is a straw that breaks the camel's back, and it might be something stupid, the most stupidest thing, even like squeezing the toothpaste from the wrong end, that will just tip you over the edge and you think, I'm not putting up with this anymore. Also, as a child growing up, in the community there was nothing. Everybody knew it went on. In nearly every household where I was brought up, there was some kind of abuse. But it was just put up with. Same as you get older, yeah, you see all the posters in the toilets of the ladies, but nobody ever rings that number. Nobody talk to your girlfriends about what you think that I do, get over it. But there's nothing where people just get together, talk about things. Trying to get counselling in my 30s was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare, because the NHS haven't got the money to afford funding for counselling. If we were in America, we'd be cancelled up and probably be dealing with things a lot better. But because we haven't got those services available, something needs to be in the community where it's not all hushed and brushed under the carpet. People can feel that they can talk about it openly with other people that are going through the same thing, rather than, yeah, we have a few drinks, talk to our mates about it, and then it all gets forgotten again. There needs to be something in place.
Worker out there, or certainly as it is at the moment, actually reflects on that. It's all tick boxes and making sure that you've done this and that, but actually nobody's looking out for that family and what they're really going through inside. I've recently worked with a family where the father felt it was appropriate to tell his 4-year-old son that the similarity of a slinky, the child's toy that goes down the stairs, and a mother, what is the similarity between the two? And the answer was they both go down the stairs the same way. He's telling that to a 4-year-old boy who's going to grow up and think that that's acceptable.
Children don't need to be in the same room as the domestic violence is happening to be affected by the violence. There's a huge misconception that if a child's in bed or not in the same room, then they're not going to see it and therefore it's not going to affect them. If you imagine what it's like to be a young person in your bedroom, because that's where you've told you've got to be, with the door closed, and all you can hear is banging and shouting and your mum sobbing and your dad screaming and things breaking. What kind of things are going through that child's mind? What are they feeling? Some children may want to get up and help, but that could put them at more risk, because if they come down and intervene, they could get caught up in whatever violence is going on downstairs. They can be fearful of what's happening to mum, of what's happening to dad, and this will have an effect on them both short term and long term. Effects like not being able to sleep properly, being too scared to get up and therefore needing the toilet and maybe wetting the beds.
Shh, don't say a word.
There was 4 of us growing up. I had 2 older brothers and a younger sister. My brothers were 6 years older. And my dad used to have the dinner on the table for when he walked through the door, and if it wasn't, then he would go into one. Even such, when I was 10, I used to cook the meals because my mum worked nights, and if you broke an egg, the dinner went out the door.
Well, I mean, I've been working in domestic violence in this community for 26 years. I'm actually retired now, but I still work as a volunteer delivering the Freedom Programme. And for all those years, when I think back, I think at first when I started, because I knew nothing about domestic violence, I learned on the job, I thought it was physical violence. I thought it was the drunken Glaswegian on a Saturday night after his team's lost or whatever. And I very gradually learned that there's much more to it and it's much more complicated than that. It's hard to imagine quite how complicated it is. And it was the Freedom Programme that finally laid it bare for me, and actually I thought, finally, an explanation of what is going on here, because it's not just physical violence. The physical violence, in fact, is easier to deal with. I find that women tell me this, that it's easier to deal with. Yes, it's dreadful, but you heal. But the emotional, the verbal, the other things that happen, they're much harder. They're much harder to heal from. The emotional abuse, the verbal abuse and so on, that's the most effective. And they can get right into the woman's head. And that's why people don't understand it. People say, well, why doesn't she just leave? Well, we all know why she doesn't just leave.
It's a bit like being in a hostage situation mentally. And people think, oh, why don't you just leave? Why don't you say get out? But it's like asking a hostage to say to their captor, well, can you just get lost because I'm going now? It's absolutely impossible to do because although you're not physically, you're mentally, like that syndrome of the hostage being mentally dependent on their captor. I think that women in domestic violence situations have that same mental thing going on in their head, that they are unable to free themselves from that because they're so reliant mentally and emotionally on that person, because they're so dominated, their every thought, through fear, that they can't react how they should react. then the violence comes in, and because that's such a shock, because you've never experienced anything like that, then by that time you're mentally already halfway there, because you're in that sort of trap of doing what they want to happen. And then they're relying on the fear of, once you've had the first physical violence, that fear that then you need to threaten it and you know it will happen, that stops you from reacting how you should react, which is telling them to get lost. So it's all about control and fear. Drip feed of getting control of the way you thought, I suppose. Little things, and because you want to please that person because they're so nice to you and everything, you're trying to do things to please them. That's how they get you caught into that trap.